And good morning again, and welcome in this C++ series in the Unreal Editor. And once again, today's video is going to be different from all the other videos of the series, and actually I'm realizing that it will not make sense to say that if I already didn't record the first 30 videos. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. What matters is today we're going to take a look at how I'm setting up the widgets that I'm using as example throughout the series. And I was not really planning to do this video because this is not really the topic of the series. I was not really focusing on the widgets, but more on the C++ functions. But since I had a lot of requests in the last few weeks, I'm thinking, why not? I'm gonna show you how I'm setting up all my widgets and then you'll have an easier time to follow along. So let's get to it. So here I am in Unreal, and today we're gonna try to recreate this widget right here that you can see on the right. It's the widget I created for the first video of the series, so the video in which we learn how to read and write into a text file. So we're gonna reuse that widget right here as an example, and we're going to replicate that one because all my widgets and all my other videos are pretty much the same thing. They're all following the same template, and I'm just changing the buttons and text around. So that's going to be the objective of today. So the first step is to create a widget. Obviously, to create a widget, we have to create a widget. So I'm going to go in my content browser and create a user interface widget blueprint. Actually, no. We're not going to create a widget blueprint. Instead, we're going to use an editor utility widget. So in editor utilities, we have editor utility widget right here. So we can create that one, name it how you want. And the main difference between an editor utility widget and a normal widget is that this one, we can run it in the editor. So I can right click on the widget and do a run editor utility widget. That's going to open my widget into another window. Well, that is when Unreal doesn't crash. So my Unreal just crashed. So here it is. I'm back again, and now I'm going to try it again. Right click on the editor utility widget and run editor utility widget. Here we go. Now I have my widget open in a new window. I can dock that window anywhere I want. I'm not going to, but I could dock it right here if I want to. But in our case, we don't really want to dock the window. We're just going to add components inside that window, and then we'll be able to run the code directly in the editor without having to play the game. So that's why we're using an editor utility widget. Perfect. So let's close that tab. We don't need it for now. We have to add components in the widget first. So let's open the widget. And here it is. So today I'm just going to replicate exactly what we have on the right. So if you don't want that exact look for your widget, you can obviously change anything. The important part is that you have all the components. They can be placed anywhere you want. They can have the style that you want, but the important part is that you have all the components to be able to replicate the behavior that we're going to do in the code right after. But other than that, the widget can be exactly the way you want. So the first step I'm usually doing when I'm creating a new widget is deleting the canvas panel because I never use it, even though it's probably useful in some cases, but I don't really like it. So I'm just deleting it, and instead I'm just going to add directly the widget component that I need. So in this case, it's going to be an expandable area, so I can expand and collapse all the content of my tab if I want to. So I'm just going to look for an expandable area that I have right here and add it into the widget. Here we go. So now I have a nice expandable area in my widget. As we can see, my widget is a little bit horizontal right now, and I want it to be vertical, so I'm just going to stretch it and place it the way I want. That's just the display of the widget. It doesn't affect really the size of the widget. But since in the end, in my case, my widgets are probably going to be more displayed vertically than horizontally, I'm just going to place my window vertically just so it represents more what it's going to look like in the end. So here we go. I have a little window right here. It's vertical, and I can start adding component into it. Here I have an expandable area, and that expandable area I can either expand it or collapse it by checking or unchecking the little checkbox right here. We can see that it doesn't do much because, well, I don't have any components in there, but it's going to collapse all the components that are going to be inside later on in the video. But for now, I'm just going to make it expanded. Good. The next component that we're missing is the text. Right here, we can see that there's a text in my expandable area, so we're going to add that one. So a new text component right here, I can drop it in my header because I want it to be at the top, and I want it to be the exact same one as I have right here on the right. So I'm just going to copy my text and paste it right here in my text component. Here we go. One read write file. So good. The header is done. Now we're going to take a look at the body of our expandable area. And inside that body, we have a bunch of components. We have a text right here for the title of the file path, the file path itself, another title, and then a text box that is going to contain the content of the file, a few buttons, and other components. So we're going to start with the beginning. So we're going to start with the text component that is at the top right here. So I'm going to add a text component in my body. Here we go. I have my text block. That one I want it to be written file path, the same thing as I have on the right. So I'm just going to copy that text, paste it right right here in my text component, and here we go, it's written file path. And also I'd like it to be centered. Right now it's on the left, so I'd like it to be centered. I'm just going to adjust the justification of my text to be centered. Here we go, same as on the right, perfect. Now the next thing that we need is an editable text component right here, so the user is able to write the path of the text file he wants to read or write from his computer. So to do that, I'm just going to add an editable text right here, that component inside my body. And as you can see, I cannot add my component inside my body because the body of the expandable area can only contain one child. And right now I already have one child, which is my file path text right here. To be able to add multiple children in a component that can only contain one, we have to use containers. And that applies for everything. For example, a button can only have one children. But if you add a container inside the button, you can then add as many children as you want. So in our case, we want to be able to add multiple children inside the body of our expandable area. So I'm just going to add a container. And the easiest way to add a container is by right-clicking on one of your components and do a wrap with. And that's going to show you a bunch of possible containers for you. So you have a canvas panel, a checkbox that counts as a container, a horizontal box, a menu anchor, and there's a few options in there. In our case, we want the components to be aligned vertically, so one on top of the other. So we're just going to use a vertical box. So vertical box right here. So I have my vertical box, and that vertical box contains my file path component right here. Good. And now that we have a vertical box, we should be able to place the editable text inside the content of our body. And here we go, it seemed to work. It added the editable text inside the vertical box that is inside the body. Good. So now we have an editable text, but there's nothing written in there. So I'm just going to add a simple path in there. So I'm just going to, let's say, write C temp my text.txt. It's going to be the name of my file for this video today. And I'm also going to paste it in the int text. I'm going to give you a bit more information about that a little bit later. Good. So now we have the title of the file path and also a text component to write the file path into. We're halfway there. Now we have to do the file content, which is pretty similar. So I'm just going to duplicate my file path and move it down a little bit in my vertical box. So it's under the text component. Here we go. File path right here. I'm just going to rename it the file content, just so it has the same text as on the right. And here we go. That one's done too. The next step is another editable text, but this time it's going to be a multi-line editable text because in a text file you can have as many lines as you want. So I'm going to use an editable text, a multi-line right here, add it in the vertical box. Here we go, it's done. Now nothing is written in there, and I'm just going to add a little int text to tell the user to write some text inside the editable text. And what the int text does is simply acting as a placeholder while nothing is written in the text box. So if the user starts typing stuff in the text, it's going to replace the int text completely. But then if he removes everything, it's going to bring back the int text because there's nothing written in the text box. So good, now we have a little int to tell the user, okay, let's type something in there. Good. That component is done, and now we can go to the next one, which is the little button right here, the read button. So we're just going to look for a button in the components right here. If I can type a button properly, here we go. I have my button. I can add it inside my vertical box. Perfect. And inside that button, there's no text right now, so I just want to add a little text component in there so we can identify the button and tell what the button is going to do when you click on it. So I'm just going to add my text component inside my button, and I'm going to name it read because it's going to be the button that reads the text file, obviously. Good, we have our first button, and now we need a second button for the write. So I'm just going to duplicate my button just like that and change the text for write. Okay, perfect. So now we have a read button and a write button. Good. But they are not aligned properly. They are one on top of each other, but we want them to be side by side. So to do that, I'm just going to use another container, the horizontal box this time, to be able to place components side by side. So right click on the button, one of them, doesn't really matter, and then you can do a wrap with and choose horizontal box to place the button inside the horizontal box. So I have my horizontal box right here, and then I have my button, and then I can take my second button and also place it inside my horizontal box. Here we go, now they are side by side, but they are not taking the whole space of my widget. They are all aligned on the left, and to fix that we have to change this slot padding right here on the top right. You can make it to fill instead of auto. So if you make it to fill, it's going to take the whole space, and yeah, that looks more like what we have on the right. Perfect. And actually same thing for this little text box right here. You can see that it is super small on the left, but it's super big on the right, and that's because of the same reason. On the left, I'm not using the fill option. It's set to auto by default, so I'm just going to check the fill, and there we go. Now it takes the whole space of my widget. Obviously, if I make my widget a little bit smaller, it's going to be smaller, like on the right. Same thing, if I go bigger, it's going to be bigger. So good, that's the behavior that we want. And actually, I think we're almost done because we have all the components that we need. Actually, there's one last little component right here. It's hidden, but I have this text box right here that is going to display display either a warning, an error, or a message log to the user depending on if the function call worked or not, and give more information to the user so he can adjust his settings. So to do that, I'm just going to add another text box. That one is also going to be multi-line because I want to be able to write multiple lines of log if I want to. So add that one inside the vertical box right here, place it all the way at the bottom, and here we go. Now I have a little text box ready to receive an output log if I need to give more information to the user. Perfect. Now we really have all the components that we needed inside our widget, but the style is still not the same as on the right because you can see that I don't have any background behind my widget right here, compared to on the right I have a few colors. So we can do that. It's going to be a little bit nicer if I have a background. So first background I'm going to add is a background for the whole vertical box. So to do that, I'm going to select my vertical box right here on the left, right click on it and do a wrap with, and we can use borders. A borders is just a parent that has a color, and here we go. We can see that now I have a background behind my vertical box. It's white, it's not nice, so I'm just going to change the brush color, which is the color of my border, and I can set it to any color that I want. In my case, I'm just going to use the little color drop icon and select the same color that I have on the right. Here we go. So now I have the same background that I have on the right, and I'm going to do the same thing for my two text components, because on the right, I don't know if you can see, but it's a little bit lighter than here, so I'm going to do the same thing. Right click on them, wrap with border, and I'm going to choose a color for my border, obviously. So the color right here, same thing. Take a little gray that is a little bit lighter, and I'm going to do the same thing for that one. So wrap with border, and then I can choose a color for my border. I select my border, change the brush color to something. I'm going to use the same color as on the right. Here we go. So now I have different borders of different colors for all my components. And actually I have a black line right here at the bottom because this component also comes with the background by default. So I can just change it in the style right here. I have my background image color, and I can change the tint to the same tint as I have on the right. So this background right here, here we go. Now it looks way more like what we have on the right, and that's what we want. Perfect. The next adjustments that we can make is the size of the text, because right now my texts are pretty big compared to on the right. So I can change these texts right here to, let's say, the font, the size, make it, I don't know, like something like 18 instead of 24. Here we go. It looks more like what I have on the right. And same thing for those. I can also change the font to make it a little bit smaller. So 10 instead of 12. I can make it regular instead of bold, and something like that. Like, you can tweak the text as you want. Good. Okay, I have my file path, file content. Oh yeah, on the right here, I have a little bit of a space between my file path and my file content right here. And I also have the same thing right here. And these are created with spacers. Spacers are just components that you can use to add gaps in your interface. You can also do it using padding. So if I add padding right here at the top, I can add, let's say, 10 of padding. It's going to do somewhat a similar behavior, but I prefer using spacers as I think it's more clean. But you can do any technique that you want as long as it works. So I can add a spacer, let's say right here in my vertical box. It's going to add it all the way at the bottom. So I can move it up with the little arrows right here, or I can simply place it where I want. So let's say right here. Oh no, it's a bit too high. I'm going to place it right here. Here we go. And now it's a little bit too small, so I can just adjust the size of my spacer to make it as big as I want. So let's say 15. Here we go. I have my first spacer, and now I want a second spacer at the bottom. So same thing, I'm just going to duplicate that one, move it down a little bit, and here we go. So now I have nice spacers. And then for my buttons, right here we can see that I have a little border around them, so that I'm going to use the padding for it. So let's say 5 pixels around the buttons to add a little bit of a border, and I can actually do the same thing for my two texts. So in those texts right here, I can add a padding of 5 instead of the default padding, just so there's a bigger border around the text, so it's not completely aligned with the little border right here. Good. So yeah, that's pretty much what we have on the right now. That's perfect. The last thing that we have to do is to rename the components, because all the components right here comes with default names, and if you're using those components in the code, it's going to use those exact same name, and names like editable text 20 or a multiline editable text 0 doesn't tell us anything. So that's going to be the text that we want to use for the file path. That's going to be the text that we want to use for the file content. That's the button of the read, not button 0. That's the button for write, not button no underscore 0. So these names don't really make sense, so I'm just going to rename all those components one by one. Here we go. So I renamed all my components. So I have my expandable area underscore widget, text underscore title, border underscore background, vbox underscore content, text underscore file path, border file path, editable text underscore file path, my spacer, text file content, border file content, multiline editable text file content, another spacer, hbox buttons, button underscore read, text underscore read, button underscore write, text underscore write, and multiline editable text box. And I made typos, so I'm just going to replace those, so button right and the right, here we go. So good, we're pretty much done with the visual of our widget. Now we just have to do the logic, and for the logic it's straightforward and it's super simple. We just have two buttons, the read button and the write button, and we want to execute code when we click on either of those. So I'm just going to select my read button, go all the way down in the details panel, and we can implement the unclicked event. So when we click on the button, we're going to execute some code. So unclicked event right here, it's going to create the event node. Then I can go back in my designer one more time, select the right button this time, and do the same thing. So I'm going to implement the unclicked event for my right button. Here we go. So now I have the two events that we can use to call our code. So the code that is going to be executed when we click on the button read, and same thing, the code that is going to be executed when we click on the button write. Perfect. So we have all the nodes that we need, and on the left right here we can see all the variables and all the components that are available to us in the user interface. So the button read, write, file path, the expandable area, and the file content, and the message log widget component I have right here. The text is a little bit long, but here it is. So I have all my components. If you're missing some components that you have in your user interface, but they are not right here, it's because they are not exposed as variable. And to expose a component as variable, you can go back in the designer, select your component. So let's say this spacer right here, I really like that one, so I want to use it. I'm just going to check the little checkbox right here is variable. And now when I go back in my graph, I should have access to my spacer. And you can do that for all the missing components that you need to have access into the graph. But in my case, I don't really care about the spacer. So I'm just going to uncheck the is variable, and now it should disappear and I don't have access to my spacer anymore because it's not a variable, it's just a spacer in the user interface. And now the last thing that we have to do is the logic, so the blueprint logic that is going to call our C++ function. And since all of our functions that we're going to do in the series are static, we don't need an object to call the function. We can just write the name of the function and we should be able to call it. So if I right click and search for read a string from file, which is the function we create in the first video of the series. So read string from file, here we go. I have this function right here, that's the function we created, and we can connect to our first button, the read button, and actually I'm just going to connect the right one too, so write string to file, here we go, I can connect it to my right button, here we go. So now we have the two functions that we're going to create in the video read write from a text file, and now we just have to connect the parameters to them. So first we need the file path, and the file path is coming from this little guy right here, the component for the file path. So I can search in my components right here, it's the editable text file path, so I'm going to use that component, and then from that editable text we're going to get the text, so get text editable text right here. That's going to give you the text written in the editable text, and then we can feed that as the file path. So the path of our file we're going to read or write. In this case we're going to read it, but we're also going to use the same path for the write. So I'm just going to also connect it all the way at the bottom right here in file path, because we're going to use the same path. It's going to be simpler like that. Good. So the part with the file path is done. Now we just have to write the output of the read string from file inside the file content right here, because we want to display what is written inside the file to the user interface. So when we call the read function, it's going to return you what is written in the file, and we want to display that right here. So that component is the multi-line editable text file content. So I'm just going to get that one. And instead of getting the text this time, I'm going to do a set text, set text multi-line editable text. That's going to give you a function that you can connect right after the read string from file, and then you can feed it the return value, and that's going to write the text that we just picked from the text file inside the user interface. Here we go, just like that. Perfect. So that should work, but then what I'm doing in my videos, I'm also displaying more information to the user based on the info message and if it was a success or not. So to do that, I'm just going to scroll to the right a little bit more and take my component, the message log right here. So multi-line editable text message log, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do a set text to display the log to the user. So set text multi-line, just like that. Here we go. I'm going to feed it the info message in there. I'm just going to try to make the link as clean as possible. Here we go, just like that. So I'm setting the text using the info message that I received from my function, and then I'm going to change the color of my text using the boolean right here. So I'm going to display it as red or white, depending if it's an error or a success. So I'm just going to do set the foreground color, which is the color of my text, just like that. Connect it after the set text, and then for the color I'm going to do a select because I want to pick between two colors. So select color, and then I'm going to connect the out success right here, just like that. You can add a reroute node just to make it a little bit cleaner. Here we go, just like that. Okay, it's not perfect, but it's good enough for now. And then for the colors, if it's a success in the A color, I'm going to write it as white, but if it's a fail, I'm going to select a red color, just like that. So it's an error message, it's going to be red, perfect. And that's it for the read string from file, but then we have to do the same thing for the write, or more or less. So I'm just gonna scroll back a little bit right here. In the write, we want to provide it the string that is written inside the file content field right here. So I'm gonna do the same thing that we did right here, but using the file content instead of the file path. So in the file content, I'm going to get the text of my file content, and then I can feed it to my function right here as a string, and that's going to write this string inside my text file. And then same thing for the information message. I'm going to do the same exact thing that I did right here on the right. So I'm just going to duplicate all those nodes right here, duplicate all that, paste it here. Then it's not going to be clean, but whatever, it's going to be good enough for now. Connect it just like that. I'm going to provide the out success right here, and also the information message right there. Here we go. So yeah, it's not very clean, but it should be good enough. So for this one also, when I'm calling my function, I'm going to return more information if it was successful or no, and also an information message, and I'm going to feed those information inside my user interface in this little text box right in that is hidden at the bottom. Good. So that's an overview of the code, and actually I think we're done with our user interface. So now we can compile everything, save the user interface, and actually you can run it right here in the top left corner if you want to test. So if you run the utility widget, it should open the window just like that, but you can also run it like I showed you at the beginning in the content browser. So I can just hide those widgets because we don't need them anymore, and now I can right click on my widget and do a run editor utility widget, which is also going to open the window for you. And now we're going to quickly check if the window works actually. So I'm going to try to read the file. So the file is this file right there, so I'm going to try to read it. It doesn't exist, so it failed. So I have an error message right here telling me that the file doesn't exist. Okay, why not? I'm going to try to add some things in there. I'm going to write some file content and click on write. It's going to write my content inside the text file. Good. Now if I try to delete the text and I read it one more time, it should reload the text because that's what is written inside the text file. And we can do that obviously until the end of time. So I can write my text file one more time and then I can try to read it. It's the same content, delete, read, and it come back. So here we go. We can set everything works, and I can collapse my content if I want to. I can show it, collapse, show it. So you can have multiple widgets, one on top of each other, and you can just collapse the ones that you don't need and vice versa. So yeah, that's it. That's how I'm creating all my user interface that I'm using in this series. So if you want to replicate the same user interface as me, you can simply duplicate that one over and over and over, change the components, rename the ones that you still need, and add the new components that you're missing, and then you can just use the same template over and over for all the videos in the series. But anyway, that's gonna be it for today's video, and I'm gonna see you in the next one. Bye bye!